All right, so eventually in chapter 4, we're going to get to this thing called triangle congruence. So congruence means that two triangles are the same. But before we do, we're going to start with triangle classification. So go ahead and open up to the blue flap that says 4.1 triangle classification. We're going to fill in these 8 boxes first, and then we're going to do 3 examples up top. But we're going to fill in these 4 boxes with triangle classification. So there are 2 ways to classify triangles. So in the first box, in the upper left, you're going to write triangle classification, and across the top, we're going to classify triangles by their sides. So write by sides and then draw an arrow pointing to the right, because there are 3 ways to classify triangles by their sides. We're going to do that across the top of those three more boxes. And then write by angles and draw an arrow going down, because there are 4 ways to classify triangles by their angles.
Do we draw that on the blue?
Uh-huh. In those 8 boxes.
Yeah, that's confusing.
Really? Okay. So there's 8 boxes right here. So in this first box, you're going to write triangle classification by sides, and then you're going to draw an arrow pointing to the right. There's 3 more boxes. Then you're going to write by angles and draw an arrow going down, and we're going to draw 4 ways to classify by angles going across the bottom. Do you know? What? Yes.
Like this.
You guys told me you do. Yes, thank you. Yeah. Okay. So triangle classification by sides, draw an arrow to the right. Triangle classification by angles, draw an arrow down. Okay. So we've got 3 ways to classify by sides. So the first box is going to be an equilateral triangle. So an equilateral triangle has 3 congruent sides. So you're going to draw an equilateral triangle. You're going to put 3 tick marks, 1 on each side to show congruence. And any triangle that has 3 congruent sides is going to be an equilateral triangle.
They're not all in the same box.
Uh-huh.
So it's all in the same box.
For now, we're going to fill it in. Yeah. So we're going to the right. We're classifying by sides because this one has 3 congruent sides. Okay. The next way to classify by sides is to have an isosceles triangle. So an isosceles triangle has at least 2 congruent sides. And you're going to put a double tick mark on one side and a double tick on the other side. Those 2 sides are congruent. The third side is usually a different length. What ends up happening when you have 2 congruent sides, we're going to learn later in the chapter that the base angles opposite them are also going to be congruent. The third way to classify triangles by their sides is to have no congruent sides. That means one side is 1 length, the second side is a second length, and the third side is a third length. That's called scalene or scalene. You'll hear it pronounced both ways. Scalene or scalene. Either pronunciation is usually acceptable. And mine ended up right where the hole punch was at, so I had to write it again. Okay? So when we're talking about triangles and we're talking about how to classify them by their sides, there's 3 ways. There's equilateral, isosceles, and scalene. All right? So you should have the top 4 boxes filled in. Now we're going to work on the bottom 4 boxes, which means we're going to classify by angles. Okay? So the first box underneath the classification is acute. So an acute triangle means that the triangle has 3 acute angles. All 3 of the angles on the triangle must be less than 90 degrees. Can they be equal to 90 degrees? No. They have to be less than 90 degrees. Okay? If they have 90, if the triangle has a 90-degree angle, it's going to have a different classification. Okay? Most of you can think of that in your head, right? All right. The second box is going to be what we call an equiangular triangle. That means that all 3 angles are congruent. All 3 angles also happen to be acute. All 3 angles also happen to be 60 degrees. Because if you take 180, you divide by 3, guess what you get? 60, 60, 60. All right, the third way to classify a triangle by its angles is a right triangle. Right triangles are going to have exactly 1 right angle. Can a triangle have more than 1 right angle? How many degrees does the total angles of a triangle add up to? 180. So can you have more than 1 angle that's 90 degrees?
No.
Can you have a triangle that has 2 90-degree angles? No, you can't, because that would add up to 180. What would happen to the third angle? Right? If you... All right. No problem. The fourth way to classify a triangle by its angles is obtuse. So an obtuse triangle is going to have exactly 1 obtuse angle, which means it's going to be greater than 90 degrees. So one thing I want to point out here is that I strategically placed where the equilateral triangle is at with where the equiangular triangle is at. If your triangle is equilateral, guess what? It's also going to be equiangular. If you have 3 congruent sides, you're also going to have 3 congruent angles. So what I would do is put like an equal sign going this direction between these 2, because if you have one, you're also going to have the other. Your triangle will be not only equilateral, but it'll also be equiangular.